This is a Q Media production.
Welcome back to Leading Change. In today's episode, we're diving into a conversation that is long overdue: how neurodiversity shapes leadership, productivity, and workplace culture. Our guest today is Joey Ballantyne, a former executive and business diplomat turned neurodivergent career coach and founder of Grit and Grace Collective. Joey helps neurodivergent women break the cycle of burnout and build careers that work for their brains, not against them. What does it really mean to be neurodivergent in a professional setting? Why do traditional work structures often fail those who think and process differently? And most importantly, how can leaders create environments where neurodivergent and neurotypical people thrive together? In this episode, we'll cover the strengths neurodivergent minds bring to leadership and business, why clear briefs and structured environments are game changers, how leaders can rethink their approach to inclusion, and the power of creating your own personal user manual. If you're a leader, a change maker, or someone who's ever felt the way you work just doesn't fit the mold, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hi, Joey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Now, let's start at the beginning. What is neurodiversity and what does it matter to businesses?
Okay, yes, it's really a hot topic at the moment, isn't it? So I can tell you what I know as a grown-up neurodivergent human, but not a medical practitioner. But neurodiversity is actually a way of describing the entire human race. Just like biodiversity refers to all the differences of our physical environment or a natural environment, neurodiversity is the fact that we all have unique brains and no two brains are the same. What we are also needing to define is what is neurodivergence, which is a subset of the human population that have a slightly different way of processing information through their bodies and their brains. So neurodivergence includes experiences of being autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, Tourette's, even complex PTSD. It's a broad umbrella of, I don't like to say conditions, but experiences is the word I quite like to use, that you were born with. And some people acquire a neurodivergence through trauma or particular events in their life. So what it then means is that certain ways that we think are different, or the ways in which we process information. So executive functioning is quite different. The way information is processed is really different. There are heightened sensory sensitivities to the physical environment around us. And what we find is that neurodivergent humans, like myself, can then appear to just be a little bit different. Some a little bit different and some are really big different. And in the workplace, this can show up in terms of fidgeting or interrupting or having wildly different reactions to circumstances. Some of those sensory sensitivities can lead to anxiety or stress in the workplace. So it's really important for business that we learn more about neurodiversity generally, but also the experience of neurodivergent people, because all of these stressors that neurodivergent humans experience in these sort of let's say typical workplaces mean that basically productivity is being reduced quite significantly, to the point where many neurodivergent people find themselves in burnout a lot quicker, may stay out of the workforce for longer, aren't bringing their full potential to work. So we're basically leaving value on the table if we don't look at ways in which to make the environment and the management practices inclusive of all. There is actually quite a bit of research to suggest that neurodivergent people bring incredible levels of performance to organizations in certain areas. And so, I think it's the next, I kind of call it the final frontier of D&I, is that we have like 20 to 25% of the population that is neurodivergent. So it's really relevant to everybody.
Now, you actually found out about your neurodivergence later in life. Can you tell us a little bit about this story how you figured out that this happened, and I suppose also your previous experience. How did it help you to reflect on your previous work life?
Yeah. We won't get this into a therapy session, but for sure, like 80% of women are diagnosed neurodivergent after the age of 18. So I was at the ripe age of 46. So to think that it took that long to make the connection. So I'm in a pretty populous group of women now realizing that they do think differently and that their body responds to stimuli differently. Um, Gosh, it's something that kind of creeps up on you. You know you're a bit different, probably right from school. You might be exposed to a bit more bullying. Then in the workplace, you might be quite well liked and appreciated by leadership in the early years of your career because you're thinking outside the box. We don't really tend to see hierarchy, so we're more inclined to just tell the CEO what we think, can progress quite quickly in some cases. And I'm probably talking very much about my own experience, which is not reflective of others that have experienced kind of more uh, challenging experiences within the workplace. But um, I think over time you just wonder, why do I say things that people don't seem to understand until it's another 2 or 3 weeks later? We do have this sort of spidey sense that can pick up what's going to happen in the future. Or why can't I stop interrupting people? Or why am I being, reprimanded for fidgeting? I have literally at a common employer that you and I were both at was reprimanded for fidgeting too much in meetings and not looking like I was paying attention. So you got this sort of sense that, something's not quite right, and I feel like I'm missing these memos. What is it that I'm doing wrong? And then I think, I know for me, but certainly a lot of women just hit burnout, or they hit a point where they literally can't kind of keep doing it anymore. And when I say doing it, it's this practice of masking and camouflaging. So masking is where you basically are putting on a persona to fit into the environment that you're within. Same as a camouflage. Some people call it like copy paste behavior or mimicking. And we get to a point where we sort of just don't have the energy to do that anymore. It's not even controllable. You just start to blurt things out, or you start to express yourself. And that then, and especially now as the awareness of neurodiversity and neurodivergence is increasing, and we're all talking a lot more about it, people are starting to reflect on whether they are neurodivergent or not. So I'd had a friend who'd suggested it. My sister had suggested it. When I went to get a mental health plan from my GP, as I went through the criteria, she said, "Have you ever been tested for autism?" And I was like, "Well, no, but it's been on my mind." So I was lucky to get that, I guess, that medical support, and then progress through to a formal diagnosis, which is a choice. There's also no issue if you don't want to go through a diagnostic process. There's enough, I think, information out there now, and also we know our own bodies and we know our own brains. So if we feel as though we are diverging from the norm, then we are diverging from the norm. So um, identifying as neurodivergent or being diagnosed as neurodivergent are both equally valid. So for me, it was an interesting process. And I've spoken to many people, especially my clients, where you go through a process of grief that you've lost some time. It's hard to put your finger on what that is. Is that, have I been someone else for all of this life so far? So who am I versus who is this mask? Like, which bits are me and which bits are the things that I've just embedded as myself? Bit of anger. And then there's, I guess, a process that takes time of a bit of acceptance, and then creating a stronger sense of self and a stronger and more authentic identity particularly as a professional. Um, and, and you asked, like, what does it make me think about the career so far? I mean, I just reflected on how many strategies and hacks and tips and tricks. Like, I have every management book under the sun, which many people do, but I used those as my coping mechanisms. to be able to continue to succeed. And I've since then, and we'll talk about this later, but taken all of those strategies that I'd embedded in myself, learned a few more, and packaged them into my own coaching program. And I now just pass on that knowledge so that other women can find ways to assimilate within a very slow-moving, typical workplace.
You said 25% of the workforce is neurodiverse. And I think that, if somebody's sitting at a desk and they've got 3 people around them, so chances are one person has some sort of neurodivergence. So if we take that back into businesses and look at, we are leading change every single day. There's not one day where something is not changing in a business. So if we start looking at businesses and thinking actually a quarter of our workforce might experience change differently to us, or maybe in fact it is us who is experiencing the change, what are businesses doing wrong? What are the experiences that people are having, and what are the things that are actually poorly impacting these people?
So there are so many moments of truth in a work day, and especially in change environments, that this answer could be as long as a piece of string. I think there's a couple of key things that that would summarize them. I think our change management, and I come as a former change manager. That was my core competency in my former career. It was very repeatable. There was the same model, very structured stakeholder communications, which went by kind of rank, and you started at the top and then you eventually got down to the lower levels of the organization, and generally done in a particular way that's fairly nebulous, doesn't really say a lot about what we're doing. There's all this fear about actually being direct or being too specific. So I think the communications within change management is a massive area where we kind of get things wrong, that particularly on the content side of things, it's far too vague. I use the word nebulous. I just love that word. It's not concrete. It's not specific enough. And that's something that neurodivergent people really rely on. They rely on clear instructions, clarity of message. Like, they want things to be quite black and white. They think literally and logically. So when things don't kind of connect up, or even in a communication where the strategy might list, say, 5, pillars or whatever, and then you see another communication that only lists 4 of those pillars. Oh, like, those things are like red rags to a bull. And so when it comes to communication, the detail really matters, and then the way in which that is expressed and disseminated, it really matters, and time to process. I think also when it comes to change, but also business as usual, I would say, good practice is good practice for everybody, right? Whether we're having a meeting, we're going to send an agenda in advance, we're going to take notes, people will all have a chance to contribute, something will be summarized and sent out at the end. We don't seem to do any of that anymore. A lot of the etiquette in organizations has been lost through speed and trying to get ahead and fast. And a lot of these really important standards have been lost. And I think for neurotypical people, what I've noticed is that they have an ability to kind of absorb a lot of that mediocrity that might creep in, or that complacency. There's an ability to sort of not give so much of a care if something doesn't quite match. But for my experience, obviously this is all in my experience, is neurodivergent people, bad practice actually impacts them much more acutely. So where there are these poor practices or bad practices or sloppy practices, in any case, whether it's change or not, I noticed for myself and with my clients that it leads to things like confusion, and then confusion in trying to kind of make sense of what's going on leads to frustration. And then that emotion and the confusion kind of leads to a level of overwhelm, which then leads to anxiety and then leads to sort of physical kind of body keeping the score type, like feeling physically tired, mentally tired. And that is then the result of some of these things we're getting wrong in change management. I think our standards in business should just be lifted writ large, but especially within change contexts where neurodivergent people can actually be wonderful followers and wonderful kind of frontline leaders of change if they know why. There's, the rationale is really clear, that there's logic to the approach. It's very clear cut, concrete, all of that. They're not resistant. We're all pretty like problem solving oriented, but when it's all very, grey and a bit black box, I think that's where we miss the opportunity to really engage neurodivergent people in change.
I love that you're saying they're, great change leaders. And, what are some of the tactics that we can use to actually enable neurodivergent people to be these change leaders, whether for their teams or sort of champions across the business?
That's a hard one because, even just middle managers, how do we enable them to be great change leaders? I don't think it's particularly different whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. I always, when I was in line leadership after having been a change manager, but they're in a position of leadership where, the corporate had decided new strategies and I'm there as the translator and the implementer, what I'd noticed is that other leaders started talking about the change well before it was very clear what the change was. And so they created a lot of, uncertainty ahead of way too far ahead of when it was ever going to impact anyone. So I looked at the evidence in front of me and I thought, well, there's actually nothing to see here yet. And so I just didn't put it as a regular topic on my weekly meetings. Like it just wasn't relevant. What am I going to tell you? The same thing I told you last week, that something's coming, like winter's coming. And I think it's just that is we don't need to be managing something that isn't there to be managed yet. I think that's a sort of a key thing. But when it does come down the line, it's like, right, well, we've got these very clear, well, if I'm, say, a leader, I'm receiving something that doesn't make sense to me, it's not clear cut, what's practically the thing that needs to be done differently, by when does it need to be done differently, and why are we doing that? Well, then I should go back and clarify that before I transmit that to my staff. Like as a translator, leaders need to be that, people leaders and frontline leaders especially need to be that person that if I don't understand it, then they're not going to understand it, And so ask those questions before getting into the process. And then I think the third part is when we're actually in the process of leading change is to just try and bring the humanness to it. Everybody is just a human connected together through these threads of job descriptions and tenure and whatever. But to be as authentic as you possibly can about what you know, what you don't know, and not be that kind of puppet for an organization. I think people, and I've read actually something like 2023, the word authenticity was like one of the highest hit words in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And it's like people are wanting authentic leadership. I think I saw another HBR article about 75% of whatever respondents in this survey were like, I just want more authentic leadership. And I think that's just about being human, that we don't all have the answers. We are also each going through this process as well. And that I think does bring a bit of fear and a bit of like, it's a different way of engaging in the workplace. But I think it's not just refreshing, I think it's what will cut through and help, organizations evolve. I even think the word change is a little bit kind of overused now, like, because as you said in the opening, we're constantly in a state of evolution. No organization stands still, because if they did, they would be eaten up.
One thing that I've taken from what you've said is basically we should just be having good practices for everyone.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we end up being inclusive.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, I think, for people to understand that we do often rush change. We rush communications in the excitement to get it out there. But it sounds like slowing down, doing things the right way, maybe not necessarily putting your foot on the accelerator, will actually not only be better for business, but also better for all of the people. I think it sounds like that more neurotypical people probably connect the dots a little bit better with ambiguity, can kind of deal with it. And so we kind of assume, it'll be fine. But really sounds like that's not really the case.
Yeah. Less haste, more speed. The one that I've been using for myself in the last couple of years since, going out on my own as well and being very keen to keep my little enterprise small. I don't want to create this huge organization, but it is this term, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I've had to do that because as a sole operator, if I try to do 5 things at once, nothing's getting done. But if I do this one email really well, or that one promotion really well, or this podcast really well, it will deliver results faster. And I think that's the case in this day and age for everybody. Trying to keep up with this arbitrary pace of information and craziness of the world it's impossible to do so effectively. That's why the World Health Organization has listed burnout as, I think they've listed it as a disease or some sort of criteria that puts it on their radar, that globally many people are burning out. And the counter argument is basically to slow down and just do things properly, do things in a quality way, enjoy the moment that we're in. So many people are, and I know I did this for a very long time, where I just literally skimmed through life just trying to keep up with everything, and it's impossible. So yeah, I think going slower, investing in good practice, less is more. Maybe one really good quality change intervention is better than 4 or 5 rushed change interventions. Maybe even the scope of change could be challenged in terms of how much needs to be changed at one point in time. It might be more sustainable to take small things rather than great big transformations. I think it's just every human is struggling with the pace of change, and I think those tactics can be helpful for everyone.
Do you want your team to achieve peak performance? Well, then it's time for a change. Welcome to Leading Edge. We're not about traditional training. We're about transformation. Our outcomes-based leadership development programs focus on real results through behavior change and mindset shifts. We customize programs tailored to your team's needs, packed with cutting-edge content based on neuroscience and positive psychology. We run engaging workshops, personalized coaching sessions, and practical exercises to ensure an enriching experience for your team. How does it work? We dive deep. We start with surveys to identify strengths and gaps, which helps us to design a bespoke program designed for your team's success. With our approach, progress is inevitable. Our expertly facilitated workshops and coaching sessions ensure growth, and the results speak for themselves. Are you ready to take the leap? It's simple. First, choose your program. We have 5 to choose from, or you can customize a program to suit your team's needs. Second, pick your duration. We deliver 3, 6, or 12-month programs. This way, we can reinforce the learnings over time to drive real change. And finally, plan with us. Each team is different, so we make sure that what we're delivering is exactly what you need. Let's unlock your team's potential together. Contact us today, and let's start this journey to transform your team to achieve greatness. I'd like to actually dig a bit deeper into the lived experiences of neurodivergent people in the workforce, because I think we've sort of talked about it at a high level and how change impacts generally, but I think we probably, if you're hearing this and saying, actually, I think I might have people who are neurodivergent on my team, what are some things to look out for?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess I can speak not just for myself, but I have near on 100 clients that I've worked with that bring their lived experience to me. And, they have a saying, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. So I guess that's one lesson, is that you may suspect someone is neurodivergent, but put away any other assumptions because the way in which they experience the world will be very unique. The fact is they just experience the world differently to you. I think one thing is very clear is the level of burnout and exhaustion. So I think if you've got team members that aren't don't have as much vitality in the team, there's going to be other factors that are um, reducing that level of vitality and energy. So I'll just kind of regroup back to the definition and impacts of neurodivergence is the information processing, taking in much more information. So connecting dots can take longer, or they're connected in a way that others don't recognize. So that can be a little bit of a rejection. Also, the nervous system is taking in sensory information differently and maybe overstimulating or understimulating, whether that be light, noise, smell, objects. I mean, my relationship to objects is very poor. I bump into things a lot. I trip over a lot. And so if someone in the workplace is kind of chronically fatigued in a way, that might be some indicating that they aren't in an environment that is giving them energy. And the other areas that people might be struggling with is tasking. If tasking is loosely given, it's verbally given, and tasks change, or that there's micromanagement on kind of how the tasks get done, and then that's creating sort of a greater level of, say, frustration or emotion in the other person. That can kind of create some disconnects that might suggest that the thinking patterns are different. Things like interrupting is really common. Yeah, wanting more concrete responses to answers, needing more time to process information. I mean, I'm no expert in doing diagnosis, and I'm not suggesting that people do, but what I'm saying is that if you don't have, not all your team is like firing on all cylinders and just bringing like their awesomeness self to the table, then you have an opportunity as a leader there to look at ways in which you might tweak your ecosystem, your work ecosystem, to bring the best out in everybody. And that might be just opening up the conversation with all of the team to ask them what might work better for them environmentally, from a communications point of view, from a tasking point of view, even a social point of view. There is a social layer at work. Some of those expectations don't work so well for neurodivergent people, but it's not that they don't want to be sociable. It's just they might want to do it in a different way. Yeah, I think as a leader, and when I got to that point, I was like, how do I bring the best of every person to this team to the table? And I felt like that was my role, is to try and manage people as individual humans. So some people required a longer, more regular one-on-one. Others I could check in with for a short amount of time every fortnight. Some people were better with verbal, collaborative kind of chew the fat type tossing tasks around. Others needed very specific written instructions, clear milestones, deadlines, all of that. Good practice. I think you said it before. Good practice is good practice.
If we're thinking about, you mentioned the environment, and I think a lot of offices are set up, from what I'm understanding from you, particularly some of these sensory experiences. Sounds like we're definitely not set up for success, particularly if we keep bringing that up. At least 1 in 4 are actually uncomfortable in the work environment. So, I know that sometimes businesses offer flexibility, say, yep, work from home, but I think that probably doesn't answer all the questions. What are some of the things as leaders that we can do to offer our teams that'll actually assist in them having a better work environment?
Yeah. And it's tough because there's this bit of a groundswell to bringing people back to the office 5 days, which is quite problematic. Because they're bringing them back to these stale, bright, you know, smelly kind of environments. Potentially it might be someone's food that they choose to cook at lunchtime, or a particular perfume someone's wearing, fluorescent lights, open plan, noisy, chatty conversations. So to put that policy back in without changing the environment, I think is quite risky, given that people have been able to find some, I guess, solace in a way through COVID and post-COVID, where there are some more productive environments, say working from home. So I think organisationally at that level, even the property teams should be looking at ways in which to soften, I think, the environment, more natural light, plants, uh, rooms that people can go and have conversations in. At a leadership level, being comfortable that some people will wear noise cancelling headphones, or looking at the desk seating, that some people may be better off in a sort of further away from the crowd, other people better within a sort of a busy area. And also, I don't know, I'm not going to preach breaking the rules if you're in a 5-day, but if you're not in, say, this formal 5-day a week back in the office, what I coach is that the clever way, or the best practice way of dealing with your environment, is to look at three things actually. What are the environments that you have available to you? So we've obviously got the workplace, but is there your desk as well as the coffee shop downstairs, as well as a meeting room or a breakout room? That within that workplace, you've probably got several spots that you can work at. You've got home, and that might be the office as well as maybe the back porch. Also thinking about the library or a coffee shop. So thinking about environment as much broader. Then looking at your work, what work do you need to do and there's 3 ways. What do you need to do that is presence work, like we're doing right now? Can't do this in any other way. You can't speed it up. You have to be with someone. So you've got to be, and that can be online or it can be in person. You've got production work, which is what do you produce as a worker? What's your value add? And usually that's something that you have to do on your own with critical thinking. If I think about sort of white collar working. And then there's this process work in the middle, which is the sort of busy work. It's, approving leave forms or filling in your timesheet or checking off emails, and the triangle of the different environments, the different work you've got. And then the third piece is, what energy do you have? When do you have that energy? So for me, I don't have a lot of energy in the morning. So I'm not going to do a lot of presence work, and I'm not going to do a lot of production work, but I can get on top. I can get a zero inbox in the morning. I can get flights booked. I can get a whole bunch of other kind of process work done in the morning, but I'm going to save that sort of production work when I need to use my brain. I'm going to save that for 3 till 7 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I'm going to do that in my office, which is exactly designed for that type of work. So if individuals can get a little bit more sophisticated about the way in which they engage with their work based on environment and energy, and leaders kind of step into that as well and say, well, when do you have the energy to do what type of work? How can I support that flexibility in a more nuanced way, rather than just saying, oh, you need to be in the office 2 days a week? Well, people take that pretty literally. They come in 2 full days and then they just do whatever work, when in fact, maybe it's 2 days over the course of 5 days and it's doing this particular type of work while I'm in the office. Pretty long answer, sorry, but I think we can get a lot smarter. And that really saved me during my consulting career, right? You'd be similar, like you have a client and you might get, this side table with it, lucky to get a chair. So my backpack has everything I need in it. So no matter where I am, whether it's in the foyer of this building or at the coffee shop or at my home office, I've got exactly the same equipment always with me, so that I can't ever blame anyone else that I don't have the tools to do my work. And so that's, it's that self-empowerment to manage within what is still a very typical environment.
It's funny. That's actually quite reflective, that consultant piece. I always go into the clinic, look, just throw me in a corner, throw me some scraps, I'll be fine, totally self-reliant.
Exactly. You get everything from like these grand offices, or you might even be sitting in with the CEO in their office, or you get this like skinny table with no chair that you have to source every morning. Like it's, but it creates that, what is it? Inventions of mother of nature or whatever. Like I'm never good at those sort of very typical sayings, but you solve the problem that you have. And so I was never going to kind of turn up without a charger or my rescue remedy or, the notebook, or I really like highlighters or post-it notes. If they're the things that, you need to process and work effectively, then have them with you. Don't rely on anyone else.
And it's really interesting because it sounds exhausting. Sounds like, you're not just getting through your day and having these things ready because, as a neurotypical person, I go, okay, here's my bag. It's all ready to go. No problem. Don't even think about it. Whereas you're not only doing that, but also experiencing the world in a different place that's coming at you that might not be a way that you can absorb it. So now we understand it from that neurodivergent point of view. Let's take it from the leaders. So you mentioned burnout, and it sounds like a lot of your clients are women who are experiencing burnout. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be men listening who are neurodivergent, and they are absolutely reflecting on these experiences. But if you're in a position of leadership, and you might not even have that flexibility to say, I want to do this in the morning and this in the afternoon, because just the nature of the work when you're sitting in that chair. What are some things that you recommend to do really on that sort of self-care and looking after yourself?
Yeah, and having been a leader who happened to be neurodivergent, I had to find ways to incorporate this self-care in the margins, because there are so many fixed expectations as a leader. The fact that I don't like to do, important meetings on a Monday morning was not on the ambassador's radar. When I was in Washington Embassy, that is when the branch manager's meeting is 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. That was the last time of the day or week that I would have picked to do that meeting, but that meeting was happening regardless. So yeah, I get the challenge. I see where you're at. And so I think you've got to look at some of that fixed things and plan for those, because that's the only thing you can really do. So I personally, on those particular days, would do nothing more before that 10 o'clock, but just get my mind in order. So I think my talking spot in that particular meeting was maybe less than 2 minutes, but I did spend a good proportion of that morning just thinking through what would be valuable to this audience, like almost over preparing, because my brain was working slower. I wanted to make sure that I didn't waste people's time when I got there. It was an important part of my role, but it also would help me kind of set myself up for the week that, okay, by 10 o'clock, I've reviewed what we've done, what the team says they've done. I've said, okay, none of that's good enough. Have you got something better? And then I would go to that meeting, and then I sort of would start the day again. That's just one example of what I would do. I found myself walking to work instead of driving. It was literally, I think, less than 2 kilometers. So originally I would drive to get there quickly. I'd ride my scooter, get there quickly. But I found that if I walked, I had time to sort of rev up. I had time to regulate my nervous system, give it kind of that natural energy of movement as well as nature. So I built that into my day. I've always been I learned very kind of early on this kind of, can't remember what they're called, like purposeful pause, I think it is, where just at any point in time, you might just take a deep breath, like, because most of the time I'm breathing right up here, in a state of anxiety all of the time, just waiting for the next thing to hit me, when in fact, deep breathing, diaphragm, whatever the word is, diaphragmatic breathing is so much healthier for your nervous system. So, you can take one deep breath any time of the day. It's just a matter of remembering that. I think we talked about it earlier, that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Like, maybe set the pace a little slower. Don't demand so much from your team so quickly, or don't expect others to demand. I'll get to that. Or I would often, when I found myself completely overwhelmed, there was way too many emails in my inbox, I would put an out of office internally and say, hey, please reconsider whether you need to email me, because I'm currently catching up on a backlog of requests and I won't be able to get to it anyway. So if it's really important, give me a call, but until Thursday, I'm pretty much going to be working on the stuff that's already in the intro. And people kind of liked that. They liked the clarity that, okay, Joey's focused on something else right now. They knew they could approach me, but they also knew that I had a boundary. Like, I turned the tap off for a bit because the tap's just running, and it's like, well, you guys just need to be turned off for a bit, you know? Um, I find meditation to be incredibly important. It's very hard to do. A lot of neurodivergent people either love it or hate it, but I think it's incredibly powerful. Um, I think eating really well, and all of this is relevant to any human, getting good sleep, getting good nutrition, getting movement, reducing, unhealthy substances, having emotional connection, having a spiritual side, whether that's art, religion, nature. These are, I think, the way in which we can avoid burnout and come to life and work with a more fuller tank. And with that vitality is to sort of constantly be making deposits into these different energy buckets. And it's not like a weekend retreat and all of a sudden I get back to work and I'm like, yay. It's every day. It's every day throughout the day. What are the things that I can be doing that can look after me and my nervous system?
It's almost like having, a device that's really old and the battery is just always running really quickly down and you have to continually recharge it and continually look after it.
Yeah.
Now, you're giving some great advice. So now, I suppose a great segue into what you're doing now, because you've had a huge executive career, as we've heard, but now you're actually moving into a different life. Tell us about your business.
Thank you. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I said thank you, but no thank you to corporate anymore. And really, I'd had an amazing career. And I've always been someone who never really stayed in the same sort of role for long, long periods of time, which is where consulting was fabulous because I was a consultant for a very long time, but I might have done 25 different really critical projects, really interesting projects. So going into running my own business, people had said for years I should, and I was like, I don't think so, but it became the natural next step. So I started a business called Grit and Grace Collective. So I'd always done a lot of coaching and was looked to as a good coach. I thought, well, I can do that. And I have clearly been able to kind of navigate this typical workplace, even though it's been through duress and many, many burnouts myself. But I had amassed a range of strategies and skills and hacks in order to be effective in a typical workplace. So Grit and Grace Collective is really a professional development coaching organisation for neurodivergent humans. I have a particular focus on supporting women to stay in the workplace, to find the roles that work well for them, and to help them to continue to progress into leadership. We are already underrepresented, and I want to see more neurodivergent women, moving through the ranks. Yeah, so Grit and Grace Collective, I offer a group coaching. I do some one-offs, but I really like the group coaching model. I've got a couple of programs, a 12-week program that's for mid-career, mid-level women, 12 women for 12 weeks. And then I've got an executive level program for senior executive women or entrepreneur women that runs for 12 months. And then I've got a 2-day program. And really what I'm sharing is professional skills. It's a lot of business acumen. It's all about, identity and personal branding and being really authentic and comfortable to show up as yourself. It's about energy and having the right amount of energy to do your job well. It's about the environment and how to control that better. It's about being effective and working with our somewhat executive functioning challenges and how to overcome those things like planning, time management, organization, getting better at that. So it's a really unique program. I don't think you could find it anywhere else because it's really about how to work well, but it's specifically designed for neurodivergent people. So anyone can benefit from the strategies, but it's contained in and couched within the context of the specific challenges that our people face. And it's been probably one of the most rewarding times of my career because I'm seeing people make transformational change in their own lives and they're doing it themselves. But I guess I'm just creating that container and that safe place and that environment for them to reconsider how they want to approach their work in the next stage of their career.
I love that. Joey, to finish off, if you were going to give advice to a leader on how they can be more inclusive, like the number one thing that they can do to be inclusive when it comes to neurodiversity, what do you recommend?
I have this idea that they share their own unique ways of working. Atlassian, the great Australian company, has this team playbook. You can get on their website. There's a bunch of different plays. But one thing they have is called My User Manual. It's a template for your own personal user manual. It's got nothing to do with neurodivergence. But my sense is that if we all understood that we each have our own user manuals and we articulated that and we communicated that, it would give permission for everyone else to do the same. Because the way I work and the way you work, regardless of our neuroprofile, will be different. And I think a leader can role model that transparency really simply. I prefer you to communicate with me via text message in short sentences, or I prefer that you give me structured emails that have a beginning, middle, and end and a very clear ask. I prefer to not be interrupted before 10 a.m. All of these things, if a leader is really clear about what they need in their own work environment to bring the best out in them, and say, I expect that you all know your own personal preferences, I kind of think that's the currency. I think it's the personal best practice is the currency for solving this, not the fact that there are neurodivergent people and neurotypical people.
I love that. It's great advice. Joey, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Where can our listeners find you?
Okay, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so Joey Ballantyne on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, and my handle is grownupndgirl with grit and grace. They're my main platforms. I also have a website with a bit more background on myself, as well as my upcoming programs, and that's gritandgrace.com.
Wonderful. We'll keep all that in the show notes so you can just click on through. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Lauren. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.